That is the main problem we have right now in the expansion. Throughout all of these improvements, the open world is still empty of things you would like to do to give power to your character. Welcome everyone. Yes, I know we are back with a camera on, so we put up our celebratory shirt for the time where the temperatures are low enough that I can come back on camera with blinding lights blasting on my face. For today, we are having a follow-up on what we talked about a few days ago, which was a rather sad video, a rather gloomy video about the lower participation in the game right now in this second half of the patch of 10.1. with something a little bit more positive, right? That video was a bit on the negative side given the current situation, so let's come up with ways, or let's ask all of my viewers, what do you think would be some ways to bring more players into the game, or rather to keep the players more often into the game? Blizzard did a very good job being able to get record highs and very high number of players and at the release of the expansion. We have gotten the initial first record, which was World of the Draenor, which was like 13 million players buying Warlords, and then the record was matched with Legion. It was broken with BfA, it was broken again with Shadowlands. So as far as numbers on release, things are going fine. The bigger question and the bigger point where we might want to look at some solutions is how do you get players, how do you give players things to do in the game to keep them busy more than just, a month into the patch. Because with the beginning of modern WoW, from that point onwards, we had this problem which now has become at its biggest. It was still a problem in Legion, it became a bigger problem in BfA, it became an even bigger problem in Shadowlands, and now it has remained a problem, which is there is nothing to do once you are done, or if you don't do Mythic Plus and the raid. That is the main problem that needs fixing. If you don't remember, or very understandably you have blocked out of your head what happened at the beginning of this modern WoW version with Legion, Blizzard thought of an idea to make this work. They said, okay, in Mists of Pandaria, we flooded the game with things to do in the open world because we gave them daily quests. Mists of Pandaria, I believe, at its peak had something like 96 daily quests available every single day. Players were kind of tired of that, so Blizzard gave them the opposite in Warlords. Blizzard gave them nothing in Warlords. They said, there you go. Back to the roots, back to Horde versus Alliance, humans versus orcs, just grind mobs. Just kill mobs to get reputation and get too exalted with these factions. This, of course, also backfired horribly, because it took you like 6 hours to get to Exalted with one faction by grinding mobs, so in like 2 weeks, if you wanted to, you were done doing all of that. That also backfired, so they came up with multiple ideas in Legion of predatory, with this almost mobile-like type of grinds you had to do in the game, with character power attached to these grinds. This is a very important point, class, so please write it down because I will ask this in the Shadowlands test. What they did is add features like Titan Forging. So now every single item from a world quest is a potential best-in slot. So that is a push, an incitement, a drive for you to log in every day and sweep up all of the item, the gear and weapon world quests in the hopes that something Titan forges. Then you have AP, artifact power. Now you have to also log in every day because you want to grind AP to power up your weapon, your artifact weapon. And guess what? The AP of the weapon changes based on your spec. So if you want to play multiple specs in your same class, you have to do even more of this grind. We are not done, because then they added other features that required you to grind things like, for example, RNG, completely random legendaries. Not only random in how you obtain them, but also random in power. You had legendaries that gave you 10% more DPS and legendaries that gave you 0, and you had no control over them. And those legendaries were set by Blizzard in a very nebulous, very confusing and not clear at all way how to obtain them. And the answer was basically just play the game. Just do content in the game. As much content as you can do, the higher the chance of you of looting a legendary. So again, log in every day, spam heroic dungeons, mythic plus dungeons, world quests, the wither training scenario. Basically do anything you can to try to get the legendary. Plus the Arctics of Power grind, plus the Titan forging, plus other predatory things like relics. The 3 relics you needed to put on your weapon. Once more, you need 3 relics per weapon per spec. And then the relics were also very often found in a single spot. Some players, some poor souls, had best in slot relics in something like Vault of the Wardens or Blackrook Hold in Mythic Plus. That's the only thing they could do. Spam that specific dungeon in Mythic Plus with the hopes that you loot the relic and then the hopes that the relic Titan forges. All of this together gave Legion one of the more active open worlds we have seen in the game. I don't wanna run the numbers, but I'm pretty sure Legion was the most active open world expansion we have ever had since players started knowing better. After Vanilla and probably even TBC, Legion was the busiest one. The problem is, many of these busy features began to frustrate some players. The RNG element of the legendaries frustrated players. This constant reminder on the back of your head that you need to log in to power up your character via AP farming was also quite stressful. Over time, starting from BfA, Blizzard started to rein back on a few of these things. In BfA, they still kept Titan forging, they still kept features like the farming of the AP, but they started, for example, by removing legendaries, by removing relics. They started by making the AP that you have to grind much less important compared to the AP in Legion. So, while this was better for the player base on a surface level, because it made them feel they had fewer tasks to do every day, sort of like a chore list that you have to do every day. The first thing I remember of BfA right now is me logging in, opening the map and clicking on every single AP world quest and then see my log be 12 quests full and have to go and do all of them, right? So they went back a little bit on the amount of mandatory things. The problem is that as you go back on these things, you also give fewer things for the players to do in-game. It's a weird concept. Players play a lot in the game in Legion, but they complain there are too many things to do. So Blizzard takes away some of those mandatory things, and now fewer players are playing in the open world in BfA. So Blizzard is quite confused. They try to make something completely different in Shadowlands. That is where the test comes in. Because as I mentioned in Legion, by removing every player power, character power, item level, gear rewards type of things from the open world, Blizzard effectively made the open world dead. Now Titan forging is gone, now RNG legendaries are gone, now RNG relics are gone, now AP farming for character power is gone. So they remove all of the things players complained about that made them feel like they were pressured on logging in every day. But at the same time, they also removed all of those things that made players log in every day, which is kind of a problem. This created the massive issue of Shadowlands of having basically a dead open world and an even worse introduction every patch of a single zone like the Maw and then Cortia, where you had to just go in and do a whole bunch of chores every day, which was liked even less than before. Though that felt even more mandatory and you were cramped in an even smaller place compared to previous expansions where you had the entire continent that you could choose world quests into, and on top of that, the rewards were terrible. The rewards weren't legendary items, weren't relics for your legendary items. It wasn't something like finding a Titan forged best in slot item. The rewards were sockets. Sockets were the rewards of reaching max rep
for those Mo and Kortia factions, which was terrible, of course. So we came from that in Dragonflight. We haven't gotten anything that gives us player power once more in the open world. We have gotten many improvements. We have gotten many improvements towards player power. In fact, we are in the expansion where we can get to max item level, the fastest of any other expansions. How you can just push to 440 in just a few weeks is just the fastest we've ever gone to. However, that is not done through much play in the open world. The open world is still mostly empty and with just catch-up mechanisms, catch-up systems, right? Things like 400 to 405 item level pieces rewards, or some events like the time rifts or the invasions, the elemental invasions or the Fyrakk assault still give some very low catch-up gear. So we are still in a position where we have nothing in the open world that forces, I'm using this word liberally, forces you to log in every day. Because no RNG legendaries, no AP, no relics, no Titan forging, no value on your AP grind. What do you have in the game right now? You have all of these catch-up events, these low item level type of events in the open world, and world quests, which are completely useless besides renown, besides reputation farming. So even though there have been plenty of improvements, like as I mentioned, many more ways for you to get gear, many more ways for alts to get gear, the introduction of dragon riding, the reworked and overhauled crafting system, all of these things haven't actually gotten you to stay more time in the open world. That is the main problem we have right now in the expansion. Throughout all of these improvements, the open world is still empty of things you would like to do to give power to your character. That's how I would frame it. Because even though it might feel bad to Blizzard, we have gotten the proof. We have gotten the proof in Legion, and we have gotten the proof partially in BfA that putting player power in the open world is going to make a vocal minority complain on the forums, on Reddit, on Twitter, and on social media that they feel like they are pressured and forced to log in every day, but it actually gets people playing. It actually gets people in the game. So the solution going forward should be to bring back some ways of character power and player power into the open world. Maybe, if we can, let's not make it as predatory and as much of a gacha RNG grinding system like a mobile game is, but maybe find a middle of the way. Something like, for example, enabling these events in the open world right now to be up at all times, to be way more active and perhaps way bigger, perhaps with way more mobs and more difficult mobs, maybe if you want to. For example, why are the time rifts up only every 30 minutes? And why do they last 5 minutes? And why are they only active in that small zone? Why is the Fyrakk assault on a weekly reward for the big boss? And why is it only in basically a handful of zones? Why is something like the elemental invasions as well on something like a 1 hour timer to change zones? There should be multiples of these up in every zone, and the rewards in these zones should be worth doing for many characters. Blizzard should be able to take something like, let's say, random number, 15%. Let's just say 15% of your character power and put it in the open world. Maybe even 10% might be enough of your character power and put it in the open world. You can have things like special enchants. Put special enchants like enchant trinkets, enchant shoulders, enchant gloves or belts, things that are not actually used right now, and put them in the rewards of these activities. For example, an enchant trinket that allows the healer to drink while moving. That's pretty good in Mythic Plus. An enchant trinket that gives you less threat, which is pretty good for some DPS specs. Or maybe just more throughput, more damage, more healing, etc, etc. Things that players would want and put them into open world activities. You can have sockets. You can have another very easy things to not actually give you straight up gear, but things that enhances your gear like sockets. Add sockets in all of your gear and half of that available from these events. Maybe multiple sockets, like a second socket slot or a third socket slot available through these events. These features would make the player base, would put the player base more in the open world, because they would be more willing to step every day into the game if it meant 10% progress towards my next socket. And then today I do my world quest and my daily quests in this zone with this event, and now I am 50% through getting my socket. These things would push the player base more towards staying online and participate in these open world features. Otherwise, you go back into this recurring problem of once the first few weeks of the patch are done, you saw what you needed to see in the new zone, you did your weeklies and your story released every week in this new zone, you have gone through the raid, or if you're a Mythic Raider at this point, you're just Mythic Raiding and you don't even need loot from Mythic Plus anymore because you already are at max level. If you don't push Mythic Plus, you're not even spending that much time in Mythic Plus and you don't find much else to do in the world right now. So I think that is the biggest problem we have right now, and something that Blizzard hasn't been able to fix since they came up with this, with the initial raw idea from Legion. The initial idea of creating many things that might put players into the open world because they felt there was a lot of power available from the open world of Legion. Ever since then, we haven't quite been able to get back to that point. As I said, we don't need to bring those systems back in the exact same way, like complete RNG legendaries, complete RNG Titan Forging. Those also feel quite unfair and quite frustrating because you have basically no control over these things, but releasing more of these deterministic rewards, receive more tokens, receive more currency in the open world that you can then exchange for the extra sockets, the extra enchants, perhaps more powerful potions or items to enhance, to empower your potion and your flasks, for example. All these things could be found in the open world. As I said, roughly 10 to 15% of your character power could be found in the open world, something that would put players back into the game more often. This is, I think, what Blizzard should be aiming for in 10.2 and seriously towards their next expansion. They need to give up. They need to give up their Shadowlands experience, where they tried to release the open world with just 0 character power available, and for the entire expansion, the only character power you can find in the open world is just a handful of sockets available from a single zone. That failed horribly. In Dragonflight, we have gotten plenty of good additions, plenty of improvements to the game as a whole, but we are still in the same issue of the open world not giving basically any power whatsoever. So, for the next patches and in the future, for the next expansion, I hope that we are moving more towards an open world that can keep players more busy and more into it, because they can feel like the rewards put in the open world are worth chasing. And unfortunately, for the players who don't like this, we have gotten now proof over multiple expansions that the only rewards the player base feels are good enough to be worth chasing in the open world is power on your character. Gear, armor, weapon, trinkets, enchants, sockets, anything of the sort. If you make the open world with nothing but mounts and pets and toys and rep, players won't give a shit. They will get bored in a couple of months and stop playing. That is the issue we have right now. So this is my take on what needs to be addressed in the future patches of this game. You can, of course, as usual, let me guys know in the comments if you have any better idea or thoughts on what should be done to get players more into the game on a daily basis. Maybe you have a completely different idea, maybe you are perfectly fine with the open world not having character power rewards, but you have a different solution to offer. Please let me guys know in the comments down below. So with this take out of the way, we are now leaving each other on this Monday. So we are starting, of course, as usual, all of the goodbyes to the dear Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel. Still reminding everyone that you can support completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. So with these things out of the way, thank you guys, of course, for watching the video. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I said it was chill enough to have the big lights again and the camera on, but, you know, just at the edge, really.